Good morning, everyone. Welcome. My name's Charlie Law. As we said on here, hopefully he's got some slides up. There we go. So I wear a few hats. I've been doing these PFC CPDs now since 2018. I'm also Sustainability Director at TD UK as a part-time role there, as well as another role in the private sector. But these CPDs, as John was saying, we've delivered these to over 2,000 attendees now. They're very much aimed at specifiers, so it's mainly architects and engineers, but also contractors to give them the understanding of the certification process initially around PFC, but also we talk about FSC and Growing Britain as part of that. But we've also lengthened out to cover things like timber and circular economy and timber and carbon impacts, because carbon is massive. The important at the moment to the designers trying to figure out how to build the lowest carbon buildings at the moment. So reducing that embodied carbon in buildings is really important. But the homegrown timber one we've added to that because that will help with that carbon footprint story going forward, we hope. There's obviously so just a bit of background on me and what I'm going to cover today. I'm not going to deliver the CPD to you because you guys know a lot of this stuff. I'm really here to tell you what we're going to tell those specifiers is the approach today. I don't need to tell you that. Just so you know my background, why I deliver these. My background is contracting. I worked for 27 years for one of the largest contractors, BAM Construct UK, where I developed their environmental management procedures. I've now been a freelance consultant for the last 10 years, mainly around the timber sector. So doing a lot of work on timber, homegrown stuff, as well as TD UK looking at international stuff as well. So hopefully got a bit of experience in this area to be able to deliver that to the attendees. So obviously we go through very much all these delivered online via Zoom. So we do record them. People can go back and see them. So if attendees can't attend the whole session, at least they can go back and see what's going on. The agenda for this one, so we look at the UK timber market and the sources at the moment, so we tell them where their timber's coming from at the moment. We're going to give them a bit of information on why they should use Homegrown going forward. We'll look at CPET and the approved certification scheme, so because they're obviously very hot, they need to make sure that that timber's certified, and that obviously allows us to fit in the PFC certification bit in and promote PFC within that section. We're then going to turn on a bit more about specifying softwoods and C16 versus C24. A lot of architects they default to C24 specifications when they don't really need to. So we're trying to convince them to change that to a C16 specification in a lot of cases. We're going to touch a little bit on hardwoods and some of the work that we've done for the woodstock study we've grown in Britain. I know it might not be too important to you guys up here, very much softwood market up here I'd say, but that's quite important for the guys down in the south trying to sell softwood into the UK market. And then we really cover a load of case studies, so we're trying to say that all these projects here have used C16 in the main timber in these projects with some hardwoods as well. So it's trying to give a bit of a confidence to the market that the C16 is already being used. You're not a pioneer by using C16. It's already being used, and you're the one that's being left out really. And then obviously we tell them what their anticipated outcomes are, which is basically they'll know a bit more about everything. And at the end of that, like John said, we've got these as certified CPDs with the CPD certification service. So we issue them with a certificate, and that says they've had an hour's worth of CPD, which they can then use towards their professional development programme. So UK timber market, we talk about the consumption of timber in the UK. All this data generally comes from the UK Forestry Commission statistics that are released each year, so they're generally about a year behind. So the latest ones we've got 2022. I know the provisional figures are probably out now for 2023, but we generally wait until September until the actual figures have been finalised, because we've done all the data for that. But obviously you can see from there that obviously the vast majority of the market for the UK is softwood and softwood products, so your particle boards, OSBs, MDFs and stuff like that, all manufactured from that softwood material. Very relatively small hardwood market, but obviously still quite a large plywood market. And a growing engineered timber market, about 189,000 cubic metres of engineered timber, so things like CLT, glulam, LVL, that sort of timber is what we're talking about with there, and I-joists fit in there as well. So that's the market that we've got. So for 2022, that was just under 16 million cubic meters. Obviously that varies, but it's generally around that between sort of 16 and 18 million cubic meters a year. We then generally go into a poll, and we're asking them. So this is fairly new. We've just started doing all this because we've got the facility now within Zoom to have some polls. So we're going to ask them, what percentage of that timber there that they've seen is from homegrown timber sources. So we give them a bit of a poll, and if you don't know, it's about 39% of that market is homegrown. Some people are surprised by that, some people aren't, but that's the figure. So we give them around a bit of information around that poll, and that will obviously give them the answer at some point. And then obviously come up with this slide here, which sort of gives them the sources of the timber. So obviously mainly UK, vast majority of our timber resource coming from the EU. And then obviously quite a bit coming from places like China, Brazil. They're very much the plywood market, hardwoods, tropical hardwoods from places like Malaysia, Norway, obviously not in the EU, but still supplying a fair bit of timber into the UK. Russia, at this time, we're still supplying some timber because that was the beginning of 2022 before the sanctions came in. Obviously, that's going to hopefully be gone in the 2023 figures. It should be. And then obviously Cameroon, some hardwoods, Indonesia, plywoods, USA. Generally temperate temper hardwoods, so American white oak and things like that coming from there, and then a number from other non-EU sources. And the breakdown of that, we give them a bit of a breakdown about where that timber is actually being used for. So the softwood, obviously, about a third of the softwood that's used in the UK is from homegrown sources. Not a lot of that going into construction. When you start to see the figures there of that, and I know they're not exact figures this is just to give them a bit of a feel for what it is, and the figures will ebb and flow a little bit, but about a third into C16 structural softwood, a third into pallets, and about a third into fencing. That will ebb and flow obviously year on year. But it's just to give them an idea that only a small proportion of that is actually going into what we call constructional structural timber. The vast majority of those imports are C24, TR26 strength graded timber going into construction. So although we might have a third of the timber, softwood timber being used is from homegrown sources, actually it's a lot less than that going into construction at the moment, and we need to try and change that around is what we're going for. On the hardwood side, very small amount of UK grown timber, about 3% at the moment from the latest figures. Vast majority of that imported. Most of that being temperate species. So 75% of that is temperate species that we do grow in the UK, but we're just not managing it and not using it. So there's some work to be done there. Hardwood boards, OSBs, MDF, better story. Co-products, a lot of that coming from the co-product sawmilling side. 70% of the OSB hardwood board UK sourced, and around half of the MDF. So not such a bad story there. And obviously we don't make any plywood in the UK at the moment, so all of that plywood that we bought is from obviously outside the UK. So there's probably a little bit of a opportunity there if anyone wants to start a plywood build. We then tell them obviously going to where that timber is being grown, and you can't really see it from that picture there, but obviously mostly north of in the north of the country, the borders obviously in Scotland. And what this is trying to show, we're trying to show back to sustainable forest management, saying that actually, that's what's been taken out over the last 10 years, but that's actually what's regrown. So you can see there's a good balance of what's gone in and what's come out and what's regrown over that time period. And if you obviously zoom into Scotland area, that gives you a much better picture, and you can much better correlation around what's come out and what's regrown. This was I think the slide that gentleman was looking for around what's England, Scotland, and Wales. I thought this was the one that was going to show it. It doesn't. It's showing the sizes. Apologies for that. But actually, it's probably not a bad representation. Obviously, when you look at that slide, the gold there would probably be similar to representation of Scotland, and England and Wales is probably the bits down the bottom. So, but it's genuine availability that we are going to have good availability over the next 20 years. Obviously, we're in around 2024 at the moment. We are going to go up a little bit. There's going to be a bit more resource available before going down. So we do need to start looking at obviously making sure we get that planting sorted out, because that's been the issue over the last 20 or so years, if not 30, that we just haven't been planting enough. We need to be planting a lot more woodlands. There is support from government for that. In the new timber and construction roadmap, they keep saying they want to plant more trees, want to get up to 16% forest cover. We're at 13% at the moment. That's 16% in England, and England's down at about 9% forest cover at the moment. But overall in the UK, we're only about 13%. But there's a lot of support there to plant more trees. Obviously Scotland as well has got good targets there. We'll see if it happens. That's always the government targets, and they never meet them. So we then talk about why we want people to choose homegrown timber. Obviously, UK is the second biggest net importer of timber in the world. So only China's in front of us, obviously importing a hell of a lot more timber. But we, net import of $7.6 billion billion dollars of timber that we import each year. It's mad. And one of the things we're sort of saying to people is, look, why are you importing it when actually you could probably pay a little bit less and get C16 timber? Start having a look at that. Lots of support. House of Commons Committee report, July 23, this was just before the timber and construction roadmap comes out. Long-term use of sustainable timber. Timber and construction offers long-term carbon storage potential. Another use of harvest wood products. Therefore, important role to play in helping the UK meet its net zero targets. And domestically grown timber resulting from drive to plant must be available for use as construction as far as possible. So, I've got links to all these if you ever want to see them. Timber and construction roadmap was published in December. Statutory tree and woodland cover targets commits to increasing tree cover canopy in England to 16.5% by 2050. So, ambitious targets there, considering we're probably half that, just about half of that at the moment in England. So we'll see if it happens. I'm not convinced at the moment, but there you go. We can always hope. So they've got the net zero strategy as well, and obviously the timber industry themselves. We've done the net zero roadmap along with so TDUK, COM4, Structural Timber Association, and others in the timber sector all worked together on this. I think the first time everyone worked together on one topic, which was a coup in itself. To develop a roadmap for the timber industry itself, which is net zero. So if you haven't seen this document, encourage you to go to the TDUK website, download it. It gives you a lot of information on what you can do to reduce your carbon footprint in your business. You'll see that a lot of it was around transport, moving timber around, whether that's from the forest to the sawmill, or in most cases from the sawmill to the end user. Is where most of that transport comes in. But you see quite a bit of that is in imports, embodied carbon within the imports that we're bringing in. So that's and that's the bit that we don't have control over as the UK. Obviously, we're importing timber from places in the world, and we might be specifying that we want it to be lower carbon, but it's up to them when they supply it. Now, it's more about supply and demand. We need the timber. They're going to produce it maybe however they want. So hence why, when you look at the target for 2050, actually import still makes up quite a big percentage of that carbon footprint, a lot higher than it is now. Whereas we can do something about our transport in the UK and get it over here and everything else, we've got more control over it. So again, if we can get more control with our timber by using more, it will help us with our embodied carbon. TDUK, we've just published this piece of work in conjunction with the STA. On the embodied carbon data. So this is a really important bit of information for a lot of architects and engineers who've been phoned up saying, oh, we've been waiting for this, we really need this information. And you'll see here, even though the sawn softwood, the EPD for the 8 to 4 is still a bit high, and we need to redo that at some point, the sawmills in this room need to have a look at the EPD. You'll see that the transport, 38, the A4 would actually get it from the sawmill to the end user, is quite a lot lower than the European timber. So 38 kilograms per cubic metre, as opposed to 56 if you're importing it from the continent. So so if we can get that A1 to 3 down to similar levels, around 56 that we got in the average across Europe, that's going to make us really competitive from a carbon point of view as well. So it's not just about price; it's going to be about carbon footprint and getting that carbon footprint down. And that's similar for other products in there as well. So a lot of talk about that.
Sorry, Charlie.
Yeah.
Why the big difference?
Why the big difference in the carbon footprint?
Yeah.
Because a lot of it is because you transport it a lot further.
The 1 to 3. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, the 1 to 3. Talking about that this morning, we think it's probably because the kilning process in the UK at some point we're still probably using gas. Maybe some mills were using oil at that time. That's out of date. That EPD that we've used now. That dates back to 2017 when that was published. So that needs to be updated. It's one of the things we're pushing the industry to do. So if you haven't got an EPD for your product in your sawmill, you need to be looking at that because your customers are going to be asking for that going forward. But the big difference was, it's probably because they were using it. The kilning is a big part of that. Nice that line. The kilning process was a big part of that, and a bit of space heating. Mainly, it's mainly the kilning process is where the big energy use as well in that process there. And if you're using biomass, obviously that's classed as in effect carbon neutral, whereas if you're using gas or oil, fossil fuels, that's a big issue. Okay, so that's the big difference there. And obviously the wider benefits, using managed productive woodland in the UK supports the UK economy for jobs. So foresters and their contractors, sawmills, transportation providers, provides cleaner air, obviously helps filter that air in those areas, acts as a natural water flow restrictors, which helps reduce flooding in areas, so it's not that water's not coming straight off the hillside into the rivers, it's being captured by those trees. And wildlife habitats and increased reputational opportunities. So all good stuff that the contractors are looking for from their social benefits. There are some benefits from using timber from the building certification. So BREEAM, SCAR and LEED are all building certification systems. So they saying how good that building is from an environmental perspective. Most of them require some form of responsibly sourced timber. They don't generally look too much at local sourcing. There's a little bit of BREEAM and a little bit of SCAR rating on local sourcing, but it's generally close to the site. And most of our timbers sourced from the UK wouldn't cover, would be classed as locally sourced in those areas. But it's good to make sure that obviously if you're looking at PFC certification, that will be covered in those. And then there is some industry demand. So this is BAM Wild Company. That's probably why it's in there, because I actually put it in there. Insist on all timber and wood-based products for temporary and permanent use are from certified legal and sustainable sources, as defined by the UK government centre point of expertise in timber, which we'll talk about in a minute, delivered with full chain of custody. And we proudly support the UK sustainable timber market by procuring growing British certified timber where it is available. So there's, so there's a one there. Wilmot Dixon, very similar. Our procurement policy expresses a preference to use timber and timber products which are assured as growing Britain to create a more sustainable future for British forests and woodlands. So there is some demand out there from some of the contractors as well for homegrown timber and try and use it wherever possible. So we mentioned CPET there and timber certification. We talk quite a bit about that because there's still a misunderstanding there of the chain of custody process. So we're trying to educate on what that means. So obviously we've got the main driver for this was the government timber procurement policy which was back in 2003, if I remember rightly, when they put this policy out, where it said must have timber from legal and sustainable sources. Then there's asked, well, what is a legal and sustainable source? And that's where the CPET stuff come in, which we'll talk about in a minute. But sustainable forestry, we sort of talk about, well, what does sustainable forestry mean? Because there's still a lot of people out there that think chopping down trees is bad, and there's, the stuff from, the 80s and 90s, Greenpeace talking about the Amazon rainforest and saying, well, we don't actually get much, if anything, from the Amazon rainforest now. It's all grown like this. This is a typical softwood, yes, plantation forest now, but that wouldn't be the way it's done now. But it's grown as a crop, is what we're trying to explain. In the same way as you're growing wheat for your bread, we're growing trees for your timber. It just takes a bit longer. And we explain that, this is a thinning process. This was probably around, if I remember rightly, 25, 30 year thinning. In this particular woodland, this was actually in the South England, not in Scotland. That's where I got the photo from. But it's a similar process. Slightly different when you're talking about hardwoods. So hardwoods, obviously that's oak. That'd be more of a selective trimming process. So you'd go in and only fell the amount of timber in that woodland that can regenerate over that period of time. So we sort of give a bit of an explanation of different processes around forestry and timber. Don't go into too much detail because they don't really know, just know it's good. And then we talk a bit more about the government's central point of expertise on timber. So this is their guidance around what they mean by legal and sustainable. And there's two forms of evidence that they associate with that, category A and category B. There's no hierarchy there. A isn't better than B, it's just different forms of evidence. It has sometimes been interpreted that wrongly, so we're actually working with DEFRA at the moment to redo this CPEC guidance. And there won't be a hierarchy is what we're thinking in the new one, it'll just be all the same. But PFC, obviously up there, along with FSC, as independent forest certification schemes are an easy route to demonstrating that your timber is from a legal and sustainable source. The other one is Grown in Britain wasn't in there at this time because when this was written, this was back in last released in 2014, 2015. Grown in Britain had only just launched it, so it wasn't in the guidance. It probably will be in the new one. So if you have got Grown in Britain certification for your sawmills, that will be included as a demonstration of legal and responsible, legal and sustainable sourcing going forward. If you haven't got independent forest certification, if you can demonstrate that your timber comes from UK forestry standard source, AQUAS, but if you've got AQUAS, it's like to come out of FSC or PFC, so to do that. But even if it's just UKFS, mainly applies to hardwoods in a lot of cases, but I know there are some softwood forests out there that haven't got AQUAS, so and then end up in the mix with the FSC and PFC. But if you can demonstrate that your stuff comes from UKFS source forest, that's fine as well. Flake T, licensed timber is only Indonesia at the moment. If you haven't heard about that, that's a licensing scheme. The issue with Flake T is there's no chain of custody scheme associated with that. It's a license to import it into Europe or the UK, but there's nothing tracking it from that point of import to the site of use. So it gives the contractors a lot of nervousness because they've got nothing on a bit of paperwork that says that timber is Flake T. That's something CD UK is looking at, so there might be something coming into that. If you haven't got any of that, then there's this compliance with the framework for evaluating category B evidence. That's a big long question there. I remember looking at it once, masses and masses of questions saying where this timber's come from, have you checked forest management's, forest management and everything else. No one's going to do this. It's too long-winded, it costs them a fortune. You'll only do that if they've cocked up and haven't got one of the other ones, basically. So that's not going to happen. So really, we're looking at these ones up here. So that's where PFC comes in really strong. It's one of the endorsed programs. So most companies, when you look at the construction companies, they're going to go for one of those three. Most of them have got PFC or FSC. Quite a few now say GID. Yes, sir.
Are you suggesting that Grown in Britain will become a category A?
In effect, yes, it will become one of the approved independent certification schemes, is what we're hearing from DEFRA at the moment. It hasn't been confirmed,
no.
But it's likely that Grown in Britain will be one of those three independent certification schemes that will be endorsed as being classified as legal and sustainable, yes. Yeah. We then have a poll around, which of those schemes they've heard of. So we're talking about, PFC, FSC, Grown in Britain. We're trying to judge, which one they've heard more about. We suspect it's probably FSC. We're hoping PFC is going to be next. And some people hopefully would have heard of Grown in Britain as well. But we're only going to ask about those three as part of the poll. And then and Flake T we asked for that as well, which probably no one knows about outside of the timber industry. But then we go in to explain what those three main schemes are and how they work. And John's already gone through this really, but we talk about PFC being more of a bottom-up standard, developed in association with the industry, independent country certification schemes, forest management certification schemes that then apply to PFC and work with PFC to build and strengthen that PFC standard. Obviously AQUAS in there. We talk about AQUAS being the only standard that's dual endorsed by PFC and FSC as well. But we sort of discussed FSC very much being more of a top-down standard. It's obviously got the NGOs, a lot more influence from the NGOs on the FSC board, and being a bit more of a top-down standard, and you will do this, otherwise you won't get FSC. Seems to be more than how it works. Some of the certification guys here might disagree with me on that, I don't know, but that's our impression in that. And obviously Grown in Britain very much taking what's available in the UK and saying, well, we've got this UK forestry standard, Why do we need anything else? We can use that because that's that if it's the UK forestry standard, minimum standard, that's got to be legal and sustainable as far as the UK government's concerned. So we can just use that as our standard and then certify the chain of custody from that point onwards. So the way Growing in Britain works is you don't actually need the forest management standard for Growing in Britain chain of custody standards, as long as you can demonstrate that you're getting your timber from a UK FS forest or UPROS. Actually, UPROS would cover that as well. But you can then have the chain of Growing in Britain chain of custody from that sawmill onwards in effect.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I think we should be very careful of putting GIB in the same pot as FSC and PFC because they're not equivalent. GIB is only a provenance label essentially.
It's not. It is a sustainability standard as well. It is covering legal sustainability, legal and sustainable. It's not just provenance. The way it's been set up, it is legal and sustainable. It is. That's the way it's set up, I'm afraid. So, as far as the what's covered by the scheme, we talk about before legal compliance, ensures forest sustainability. The schemes do robust accreditation process. There were some issues around FLEGT a few years ago, but they've generally been sorted now, from what we understand. The issues around chain of custody, as we said, FLEGT hasn't got that chain of custody process, so we mentioned that. But when you look at the compliance with CPET, we actually showed there that PEFC is actually scored higher when the government last audited it back in 2015. They haven't done it since. They haven't looked at it since 2015, to be fair. But back then, actually, PEFC scored higher, and that's more around the governance, from what I remember. The governance was seen as higher because it involved more people. We didn't talk about forest certification scheme coverage, and I know John's gone through a lot of these figures, but UK forest cover 3.25 million hectares, 30% of the total land area. Certified forest area, circa 1.6 million hectares, 52% of that cover, of which, like I say, 80% of it is productive woodland. That's productive woodland. UPROS, PFC and FSC dual certified around 1.5 million hectares, 49%, FSC only about 2%. That sort of leaves that about 9% that we think is Growing in Britain, but we haven't got really firm numbers on that, but we think it's about 9% is just Growing in Britain, mainly hardwood forests. We'll then go into talking about C16, C24 and specifying timber generally. The IP being, it should have an inclusive specification clause wherever possible. There are some companies out there with an FSC only policy, and we've said, look, that really limits your supply of timber into your construction company. So really, you very much need to make sure you've got that inclusive. Reference timber and other wood-based products, definition of the scope, temporary and permanent works, as it does in the government procurement standard. Reference the UK government central point of expertise on timber, because then that says that's the definition of legal and sustainable, then you then have to come up with your own definition of what is legal and sustainable. Obviously make there a requirement for chain of custody to the site of use, and then examples of the schemes that meet that criteria. This is what we come up with on that. So this is the one I used to use at BAM, and we've sort of modified it slightly to meet this. So it covers all of those elements basically in that one simple paragraph, and then we state the programs that meet that certification requirement. We've worked with MBS, which is the specification platform that a lot of the smaller architectural practices will use, some of the large ones as well, but a lot of the large ones have developed their own specification platforms, and we work with them to get that wording into those specification platforms by default. So when they download a specification for timber, the definition of legally sustainable and the certification schemes that it meets will form part of that specification. So automatically you're specifying that it can be PEFC as well as FSC and Growing in Britain. The other bit we sort of start to look at then is around obviously the C16, C24 issue. So we talk about span tables, and TDUK just released it. Previously, when it was Trada producing these, you had to buy these as a book. So people had to, they couldn't just download it free of charge. TDUK have made them now all free of charge to download. So anyone can download these span tables for C16, C24, which means it's available to a much wider market. So we talk about span tables, and we talk about what a piece of C16 might span. So typical floor joist, 45 by 220, can span 4.19 metres, according to these span tables. And these have been done, so just so you know, they've been done in conjunction with Edinburgh Napier University. So that's where all the stuff comes. So we didn't talk about Poland and say on average how much further do you think a C24 floor joist would span compared to that C16 floor joist there? We'll see what the answers come up, we don't know, but that's the sort of questions that we're asking. It's actually only 11%, so it's not a lot. So when you actually start looking at it and you've got floor joists, this is a Wilmot Dixon job, where they've got that size timber in there, 45. So C16 span 4.19, a C24 would only span 4.66. So we sort of try and demonstrate that, look, do you really need to be using C24? Because it's unlikely you're going to have many spans over 4 metres in a house anyway. To be fair, the houses are a lot smaller nowadays, and hopefully you can get away with that C16 span in the floor joist. Similar thing for flat roofs. 45, 195, 4.29, 4.87 if you're doing it in C24. So just trying to show some of the demonstration there, and that key one I think is that I think we can use it is the timber framing there, timber framing sector. There are some companies using C16, but a lot of using imported C24. And when you talk to them, they say, well, yeah, we just don't like it. And why? Come on, that's not a good enough answer. And we've had some conversations this morning around breakfast actually of why that is, and sometimes it's because the market gets flooded with crap timber, and they get a bad experience of C16, so they go back to C24. So we've really got to be careful about what timber, C16 timber we put on the market. I think a lot of the stuff in the UK is more C16 plus. So that sort of C16 plus would be much more suitable for this type of thing, rather than just standard C16.
C14, C18? No.
Possibly, but that's something that we're trying to keep to the grades that are generally available for the softwood side of things. C14, C18 aren't recognised as much as those C14, C18. So the industry really only recognises C16 and C24. So that's what we're aiming at.
This is lead, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And most of this is slightly softwood grade.
Charlie, has there been any research on how many millimetres you'd have to add to a C16 joist in terms of width to equal the span?
We haven't, but that's all in the span tables. But you wouldn't want to go thicker. That's the thing, because they would have the issue they would have then is their floor ceiling heights. Because if you start making thicker joists, you end up then adding more bricks, more plasterboard, stuff like that. And that's some of the big house builders have reduced the story heights of their houses from 2.4 metres down to 2.3, so they don't have to put so many bricks in the house. And so if you start saying, well, we want to increase that floor depth, that starts causing issues. Now, and I say, to be fair, a lot of that's going over to I-joist now, for those elements. But the wall panels, I think this is definitely where we've got somewhere to go. Because we're having to make, obviously go thicker with those wall panels anyway to get more insulation into modern standards, that's where we can have that extra thickness. Because and that's not down to us to make it, stronger, it's because they want more insulation in there. So if we've got, probably do it with a piece of, 100 by 50 or in 150 by 50, you might have done it nominal before, we might be going 200 because we've got 200 millimetre insulation in there in some cases. So it depends on the house, but that's really what's pushing it is more the insulation is the thickness of the wall, which means we should be able to get more C16
Can I just
in
drop
there.
you back to the C14 and C18 because it is species wide, and we get asked by people to supply. I can't remember C14, C18. We get asked to supply C16 large, for example, and you can't grade large in
No.
C16. It's got to be a 14. I can't remember.
Yeah. I can't
It's the
remember.
same with Douglas fir. So, the C16, the architects actually probably are. I don't know.
I think this is it. They're not aware. We're trying to make them more aware of just C16, 2020, C24 at the moment, because that's the bigger market, obviously. Obviously, there's Larch and Douglas fir, more specialised market. We wouldn't be selling as much of that into the construction market. It is used. I'm not saying it's not used, but I think they would be more asking for your advice on that than on the grading of those types of timber, rather than the wider softwood market. They're used to, actually, what I'm saying is they're used to buying C24 whitewood from Scandinavia. That's what they're used to buying. And what we're trying to do is say, right, equivalent timber to that in the UK would be the citrus spruce that we generally supply into the market, and that would come out at a C16. We wouldn't necessarily be grading that C24.
I don't think they're asking our advice, they just send through the orders C16 large, and obviously you turn around and say, sorry, but that's...
Yeah, and this is part of it. This is there's a lack of understanding out there from the engineers. Totally, totally agree. But that's partly that's the information. So I think we need to get more of that information out. I'm not saying we don't. I think we just need to concentrate on getting one bit sorted first, and then we'll look at the other bits. Drop me a line on that, though, and I'll have a chat with the guys at CD UK, see if we can do something on the span tables for that as well, because that might be something we can add in. So drop me a line on that. So we talked about what we can use it for. You've got people like Alexander Timber Design, which are using C16 for truss rafters. Most of the industry uses C24 or TR26 for truss rafters. These guys are using C16 quite easily. So why isn't the rest of the market using that? It comes down to those questions. Why aren't we using more homegrown timber? It can be done. So this is where we sort of keep going back into case studies. As far as stud work, again, this is Wilmot Dixon using it for internal stud work rather than metal. Can we use that? Lower carbon option, easier to fix stuff too, as well. So that's what we're looking at. So homegrown, we're talking about again going to hardwoods. There's a bit of a poll around what species they've heard of. I think you'll see oak come out there on top because that's generally what they're specifying at the moment, which is not sustainable itself because we're specifying too much oak timber. We've done this bit of work. This is a piece of work I'd done with Grown in Britain back in 2015, launched in 2016. Innovate UK funded product. It predicted that we could increase homegrown hardwood supply by over 800%, eightfold. So nearly up to half of our supply could be from homegrown timber if we've done some key things. Increasing specification of alternative species to oak. That hasn't happened. Hence the sad face there. We're not doing that. People are still specifying too much oak. But we are starting to better manage our woodlands. That's something Grown in Britain has been pushing for on the hardwood side. If you know hardwoods, a lot of you will do. You go down hardwood forests, they're pretty crap in the UK. We haven't managed them for many years. That's starting to happen, but that's going to take a long time to turn around because obviously the stuff that's grown already isn't that suitable for timber. We reckoned about 10% from the estimates we've done working with the hardwood sawmills down in South England. Around 10% of that woodland would be suitable for sawlogs, which is pitiful really to them. But they are being chopped down and most of that's going into biomass, which is criminal really. We need to improve the material efficiency process. That is starting to happen. We managed to sort of things like we could saw things like ash a lot thinner and get another plank out of an ash log because it doesn't move so much when it's dry. And we couldn't do that with oak because it moves too much. But with ash, we found that we could. If you dried it properly and stored it properly, you could get that down to a thinner initial sawing to get the same amount of finished timber at the end. So that increases the efficiency of that process. And then Central Woodstock Supply Hub was something we looked at. We was going to do something to it, but that's now been launched in something called Wood Scanner, which does a similar thing to what we was going to do. But we talked about what we could have done. So in 2015, we said by what was possible by 2050, based on the current use profile and with specification of substitution of oak. So we can increase it, we think, from around 47,000 cubic metres being used, which I think it was in 2017. We could probably double it using the existing specification profile, but if we convince architects and engineers to start specifying other species, we could increase that to maybe quite a bit more there, like 5-6 fold.
What about the ash? You're saying it's going to go up to 70,000 cubic metres perhaps, but all the ash trees are dying.
Yeah, that's why it was going to be like that, because all the ash trees are dying and they can use it. That's why we try and promote ash, because that's the ash dieback coming out by 2050. That's the reason we put that in there. It might not be available much longer after that, but that was the reason for putting that in there. We then talked about homegrown hardwood resource, what we're using at the moment. So we're getting a lot of American white ash, American ash, American white oak, come from Canada, USA. what the alternatives would be for the UK. So we've got homegrown ash, we've got oak, we've got sweet chestnut, although slightly larger movement in the sweet chestnut. Maple, sweet sycamore, sweet chestnut can be used for that. So it's a different alternative species to what they might be specifying now that they could use for those areas. There are obviously some caveats to that, because some of them will have bits more movement, some will, some care will be required. The latter, the larger movements on the Moranti, for example, etc. So it's trying to look at them and then looking at the durability as well. So which ones will be durable as well. So that's the ones and the fours there, because obviously some of them will be classed as non-durable. So it depends whether you're using it. Are you using it externally or internally joinery in those areas? And then we can sort of give them a bit of a picture about what some of those look like, and looking at the making the grade, which is a Forestry Commission document, which goes quite a bit of detail on what grades of timber you can get in the UK. And then talking about obviously better management of woodlands could increase by 6%. It has increased by 6% since 2023. More options for hardwood, things like brimstone, which is modified ash, poplar and sycamore, is helping to increase that market for those timbers. And then, like I say, we talked about the Wood Scanner website, which is in effect what we was trying to do to try and pull that amount of timbers available on one website, so people can go and search for it and find out what's available in different areas in a much easier way than they can now. And then we're going to really just a load of case studies on different projects. So Vale Homes in Bristol, 82% of the timber from UK sources. Only 6% of the materials required a design change to accommodate UK supply. So what I'm saying is it's easy enough to actually just straight substitute homegrown for imported timber in most cases, and there was only a few areas where they had to make the change to the specification. So about 108 cubic metres of homegrown timber in total on this development. Mainly, like I say, homegrown C16 timber frame, thermally modified brimstone ash and the cladding. So that's what the brimstone looks like on the outside. And that's the first Guy in Britain certified project. And that's in Bristol, that project. So that one there. Quite a few in Wales, because Homegrown Homes project in Wales has really been pushing homegrown sourced timber in Wales for quite a few years now. Gary Newman over there doing quite a lot of jobs. So this is a low fill timber frame project. Again, 18 highly efficient energy performing dwellings, C16 timber frame, 70% of the timber from UK sources, 92 cubic metres of homegrown timber in total. Another low fill project, passive house certified dwelling, again C16 twin timber frame, 43 cubic metres homegrown timber in total there. United Welsh Housing in Ebbw Vale, Code 6 passive house. There was 2 demonstration buildings, these ones were. Homegrown larch, hence why it's called the Larch House, this one, on the cladding. Homegrown timber used for windows and doors, as well as the frame. So in one of the buildings, in Limehouse, not this particular one, but Limehouse used homegrown timber for the windows and doors as well.
What species?
Sorry?
What species for the windows and doors?
I don't know. Can't tell you that, John. Sorry.
It wasn't lime, was it? Inclusive name.
I wouldn't have thought so. Wouldn't have thought so. Wilmot Dixon Staines Road. So start looking at more. So they were really quite specialist. Some of those projects here. This is a general contractor. Really trying to push homegrown timber. In Steve Cook there. Obviously, you mentioned Steve Cook, a member of the PFC board. Also on the Guy in Britain director as well. Really trying to push his company to use more homegrown timber. So they used all C16 for the internal linings inside the building, so the internal partitions and the undercover lining areas on the external walls there. So internal C16 stud work there. Another demonstration project, if you know Robert Hairstands, he's been doing a bit of a homegrown demonstration project on his own house. So he used C16 frame and walls for the sunroom, C16 timber for the closed panel roof. He's in use what we call C16 Plus, which is this graded timber. So C16 timber, but because of the different properties within UK timber, where, don't ask me to quote what the big differences are, it's around stiffness and stuff like that. They've come up with this C16 plus standard, which we can start to look at using in engineered timber products. So things like CLT walls for the kitchen and the office, now laminated timber for the floors, and glulam beams for his kitchen and office. So he's used that C16 plus specification for those elements. So, there's something there. Whether we can produce enough of that in the UK to warrant having, our own CLT factories, glulam factories, I know there's some debate about that in the room, talking to some of you earlier on. But yeah, there are possibilities there if you want to use it. I know it says UK hardwoods, but this was larch, so this goes back to larch glulam, this one. So, and cladding panel. So, largest UK grown glulam structure with 16.8 clear span, and 4 days to build it. Sorry, just go back there. Yeah, just 4 days to put all that up. Because all prefabricated, it took 4 days to put it all up, which is what we want to be getting to in the UK construction sector. And in one for the hardwood side of things, starting to get some movement here. Homegrown sweet chestnut curtain walling. This is Scandinavian timber on a project in York. Laminate timber external and external elements. So I think on this one they had one of them was looking at sweet chestnut, but there was another option where they had brimstone on the outside, and then something like ash on the inside was what I was looking at. So it was laminating it, so you had the durable species on the outside and the non-durable species on the inside to give it and obviously the finish of that as well. So I say oak, ash and brimstone is what they've used before on other projects as well. But this one was using sweet chestnut. And then the silver scented in Oxfordshire, homegrown thermally modified brimstone, ash and poplar cladding. So you've got 2 buildings, one with ash, one with poplar, and more of a demonstration project again, really a test bed for the product on this. Where was the silver grade finish in around 12 months. Key thing for this product, it's so stable. Because you've taken all the moisture out of it and changed the properties in the timber, it doesn't twist or bend at all. I've got some of this, I've put some, it was a bit of a test for me when we was looking at grain bit of stuff. Had it in my garden for about 10 years now, hasn't moved. It's still dead straight. It's good stuff. It's almost not timber in that way, but it is. And then we finish off with a call to action. So that's me near enough done. We've whistled through this, but we trust you. Obviously, I say hopefully you've got a better understanding of homegrown timber now. And we ask them to take the following actions: consider timber sourcing not just homegrown to reduce their CO2 emissions. Design structural timber components can utilise 16 strength grades wherever possible. Supply temperate hardwood species that can be UK sourced, or specify temperate hardwood species that could be UK sourced, and ensure, obviously, going back to the PFC, but ensure the timber certification schemes meet CPET requirements, i.e. PFC, FSC or grown in Britain, delivered with full chain of custody. There will be a feedback form for them, although that's probably going to change because we're going to do that through the new Zoom systems and that will come out now. But we do get feedback on every one of these courses. Generally, it's very good. The ones we've got, Laura's got probably all the results from previous CPDs. So if everyone wants to see them, know what we're trying to do and how well we're doing that, generally that we get the feedback we get is excellent or very good. Very now and then we get someone that says it's okay, but most of the time, I don't think we've had anyone that said it's poor, which is good. But it's a really good feedback on all these TPDs that we do. And then we have some, obviously, an open question session for them as well. And I think we're going to have questions later on, are we, on the panel? So,
yeah, there's time
so if there's time for them now, if anyone wants some questions.
Quick question on the Grown in Britain again.
Yeah.
Is it subject to an annual audit?
Sorry?
Is it subject to an annual audit?
The
Grown in Britain?
the actual standard, I think.
Chain of custody.
Chain of custody is yes.
Yeah, but not forest management.
With the forest management, there isn't a forest management standard for Grown in Britain. The forest management standard for Grown in Britain is UKFS.
Yeah, I gather that. So
there isn't, so there's no annual audit. Well, the only check, the check is through the chain of custody scheme to make sure that forest that they're sourcing from is in compliance with the UK forestry standard. So have they got the management plan in place? Have they got the felon licences up to date, etc. So that's the sustainability element, is to make the forest management bit is making sure that the timber is sourced from somewhere that the UKFS is being actively managed. So that's the difference.
There is an argument it's not both of us.
There is, but there is that argument. But then that's the UK government stance. The UK. This is what all this stems back to: is the UK government's definition of legal and sustainable. And we're saying, look, we've got these processes in the UK; they're legally enforceable. We're happy with that as a UK government. The key issue was, I'd say one of the reasons we're setting up Growing, but it wasn't necessarily around softwood. It's very much around hardwoods. Is why it was set up, because you had a lot of independently owned small family woodlands where PFC and FSC certification just wasn't viable in the way it was at the time. Obviously you've got group schemes now which have changed that, and that might be more viable for some of those group schemes. But that was why it was set up, was very much in the hardwood market. Hence, why we've only got 3% of timber consumed hardwood timber consumed in the UK from the UK market, because it's just not. There's just nothing there now. We've lost that hardwood market, and that's what we were trying to push, to try and come up with a simple scheme based around UKFS that would allow that timber to go into the market. Initially, what was going to happen. It was just going to have that label attached to it, say Growing Britain, and it was very much aimed at what's going to be a provenance standard at that point. But myself and people like Steve Cook working for Australian Tractor said, no, you've got to make sure that timber coming out, you can demonstrate that it's legal and sustainable. If you can't demonstrate it's legal and sustainable, we can't use it on any projects. So that's why we had to then tie it back into UKFS. In that situation, because the UKFS is allowed well under TPEC. So I get I understand that you're saying, well, it's not as robust from the Forest Management Board, but it is the UK legislation.
Charlie, are you saying clearly today that the majority of UK specifiers for projects, Wilmot, Dixon and Co, would be satisfied with Grown in Britain alone? So if we decided to do something different, drop PFC, FSC, go Grown in Britain, are you saying that that's a comfortable position?
Difficult question.
Rather,
Difficult question. It's at the moment there are certain contracts out there that would definitely accept Grown in Britain without anything else. I wouldn't say it's the majority at the moment, but there are some, like say Wilmot Dixon BAM, that would accept Grown in Britain only. Yeah, I think for the majority of stuff, the issue is obviously you're still going to need PFC for any additional non-homegrown timber. You're still going to need PFC or FSC for that. So there's still going to be a need for that chain of custody certification for definite.
Charlie, just on the ash comment that somebody made earlier, I think slides between your two slides they update, but I think the ash situation, got to be very careful that we're not giving people a false position there, because certainly in a visit to England this week, I was quite shocked at the D grade of ash, and those volumes are probably very unlikely to be achievable, and that's accelerating almost daily. And I think we need to be very careful that we're not giving people a hope that the ash will be available up to 2050, because everything I saw in the south of England, where most of this timber's standing, death rates are 70% already, and the timber isn't usable.
Yeah, that was based on Forestry Commission predictions, so they may have updated over the last few years. Obviously that dates back to 2016, 2017, so it is, that's what's in the report, is what I'm saying. That may have changed, so I can address that.
I think it's certainly worth just, as these things are being rolled out, is updating them. But particularly in that instance, I think it's really important to
we'll say something around that. That was what was predicted at the time when we done the report. That may have changed with the acceleration of ash dieback, if that's the case. Yeah. No, we can pick up on that. Thanks for feedback. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Maggie.
Back to the carbon piece. You said early on that there was lots of interest in the specifiers looking at the carbon footprint of the timber. Are they asking questions or interested in the embodied carbon as well, the carbon that's locked up in that timber?
Absolutely, that is the question. That is the question they're asking for. They want to know. They want an EPD for the product.
is that being measured? Is that kind of are those metrics travelling with the product at the moment, or is that something
Some
which
of them.
the industry needs to kind of
It's
adapt
something
to?
we in the UK industry is something we definitely need to get our head around, because like I say, we haven't got current EPD for UK grown product at the moment, softwood wise. We have, and you know that's going to be a disadvantage if we haven't got that going forward over the next few years. You're going to get architects saying, "Where's your EPD?" If you haven't got one, they won't specify your product. They'll go elsewhere to someone who's got an EPD, even if that EPD might show that we've had instances that we've heard of where people have specified concrete and steel instead of timber because there wasn't an EPD available for the timber.
Wow.
That's how perverse it's getting.
Who calculates it in the supply chain? Who's responsible for doing that EPD?
The producer of the product. So
Okay.
for softwood, it would be the sawmill.
Yeah.
Okay. For panel product, it would be the panel product mill.
But is it not more logical to continue what you've done within TDUK with Confor and produce a?
No, that's based on the EPDs though. That data that we've done there is produced from the EPDs. Are you talking about the net zero roadmap or the?
No, the embodied carbon.
The embodied
I know
carbon
they came
figures.
But if you go back to Good for Good and so on, there's going to be an awful lot of
It's not.
questions
To
we're
be
getting
fair,
would-
it's not TDK and Confor's responsibility to produce information for your products. We'll help you do it, but we can't do it for you because the issue is we've got TDUK, Confor, STO got tight budgets themselves.
So we're not asking you to do it for us. It was just a suggestion that we're already doing the calculations. But if we're not careful, all of us here will produce hundreds of EPDs, which are snapshots.
No, you don't need hundreds of EPDs. You need one EPD for your softwood product. You might need a sister EPD for the treated softwood product. That's then adding a bit more information in around the treatment process. So because you're not doing it per line in effect. So it's not an EPD for your 6B2 or 8B2. It's per cubic meter of softwood.
Could you maybe just, I'm sorry, I'll do this.
Yeah.
Could you actually maybe throw up that slide again, actually?
Yeah. Find it.
Certainly be more discussion on this afternoon because it is a big question, this whole what
That's
people
like that,
are asking
yeah.
and everything.
So it's really hard to read the writing in the vertical. So we just take it on the sound software there on the top
Yeah.
line. What this is, I actually can't read the actual.
Right, so what it's saying here is you've got biogenic carbon content here. So that's the sequestered CO2 that's been taken out of the atmosphere by the tree as it grows. Yeah. You've then got a non-biogenic, so fossil fuel element of the processing. So that's going to be your harvester, fuel in your harvesters, the transport out of the forest, so the lorries transporting out of the forest, the energy used at your mill to saw and kiln dry that product to become a softwood panel product. In most cases, the difference between those, because it's an average, it doesn't quite work out. The difference between those would work out to the figure there, which is an A1 to 3, including biogenic. You have those two figures because it depends. What happens is they're using this for a whole life carbon assessment for the building. If they're doing it as what they call an upfront assessment, what they call A1 to 5 up to practical completion, they can't include the biogenic carbon content in that calculation, so they have to use this figure.
No, you clarified the question.
Yeah.
You're 107.
Yep.
If I understand you correctly, is the total embodied carbon in the manufacturing process of a piece of wood?
Yeah.
Okay, because the first time you said it was to do with all the actual kiln drying costs and that, because there probably isn't a sawmill left in the UK that's killing with gas for it, that couldn't afford it. But
Yeah.
no, that makes more sense
Yeah.
now. When you say it that way, that makes more
That's
sense.
the fossil carbon impact. So it's from that will include your kiln drying
Yeah, that's
in
okay.
that. What I'm saying is that figure does date back to 2016, 2017. So that's
Yeah.
so that what we're saying is that might include some gas or oil
Yeah.
or something in there. We don't know. That's I don't know who done the calculation, what that calculation include. You have to speak to James Jones, BSW, and I'm trying to think. We said it was Gordon's or someone else who we said it might have been involved in that EPD production back then, because that was a Grown in Britain one done with those sawmills pulled together. I'd hope now that if you guys done that now, that'd be a lot lower. I'd like to see that. I wouldn't be surprised if it was much more down by there, because a lot more biomass out there now. But that is EPDs are going to become a necessity for you guys going forward. We've got them for most of the other products. So we've got a fire joist, we've got them for the OSB and MDF for chip. Not all the chipboard. We haven't got one for Kronospan for the UK, I don't think. But it's the softwood bit where we haven't got anything from UK at the moment. So that's really desperate. We do need something up to date for that.
As Stephen said, it would be much better to, we all need to do some work on our EPDs, but then to amass that information into a generic number
Yeah,
that
we
we
will
can
do,
use,
yeah.
rather than complicating it. Because if we do our EPDs and suddenly we have to bring timber from, you've got mills like Entrada's bringing timber from North Scotland,
Now the way
then suddenly that EPD flips.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can get a number that is, it might be 70.
Yeah. No, exactly.
Then
what we
that
do
would be
is
a much better thing to present to the
no, that's exactly what we've done here. That figure, what we do here, if we had 3 EPDs, for example, for you guys, so from Charlie's, James Jones BSW had an EPD, we'd combine that information into one figure as we've done there. So that would then give an average for the UK. So when someone's doing their initial upfront, when they're doing their initial sort of concept design for the project and they're considering whether they're going to use timber, steel or concrete, they'll have a figure for the timber. When they actually then do the actual final assessment, so once the building's been built and they've used timber from James Jones, they have to use the James Jones EPD in that calculation, is how it works. But initially when they're looking at it, say, well, we'll do buy homegrown or do we buy imported timber, what we want is a figure there that's roughly equivalent to what these are within.
Yeah, at the moment, that's a strong advert for buying import timber.
Yeah, it is.
Because
It is from this point.
I can half my CO2.
Yeah, but if you half your CO2, and if we do the EPD and it shows that you're near this, which I'd hope it would be from what I'm hearing from you guys saying it's all biomass now, and because that was the kiln drying was the killer. Transport wasn't so much of an issue from what I understand. You are on a winner because your transport emissions in the UK are 38 compared with 56 to bring it in from Scandinavia, etc. So you're then starting to look, if we can get your A1 to 3 down to near 50, 56, you're on a winner because your body carbon, your product, A1 to 4 is then much better than the imported products.
So the call to action is to get this document updated as
We
soon
update this document, we're going to update this annually.
Right.
So if you can get me an EPD before Christmas, that's a big ask, I can update that figure.
But Charlie, isn't it, I might be wrong in this, but there's obviously lots of numbers and the numbers get plugged into different parts of the process. But the initial number is the 764 that the architect would look at for the level of embodied carbon.
No, the level, well no, the figure they'd look at initially would be this one, the 657, which is the, includes everything. So that includes, so that's your biogenic carbon, so the sequestered carbon, minus, in fact, or plus the biogenics, you end up still with a minus figure. But they'll only use that in a whole life carbon assessment. If they're doing an upfront, like I said, we're doing an upfront assessment A1 to 5, they're only allowed to use that figure. They're not allowed to take any sequestered carbon into account. They can state it separately as this is what carbon this building is storing, but they can't use that in the calculation. So they can't claim that that's a negative carbon building at A5.
it might be a good idea to distinguish between your structural timbers and your fencing products. Because in Scotland, you're producing mainly carcassing timber, whereas in England and Wales, you're actually producing mainly fencing products. And timber in England and Wales has to travel further than it was in Scotland.
That's up to you guys, yeah. That's up to you guys as mill, what you want to do. That's going to cost you a lot more money to do because you've then got to have 3 EPDs. Are you?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is your structural timber then becomes more competitive with European products, whereas your fencing, you know.
Yeah, that's entirely up to you how you do it. I agree with you. If you can do an EPD just for your structural timber that's used in buildings, if you can separate that out, by all means.
What's your comments on that, David?
Yeah, I can see the point because you've got a lot of added value related out or carbon use. You know, you need to have a look at the EPDs because actually even in construction timber you're going through most of it, you're kiln drying it, so there is some carbon use in that. Mm. You're transporting it around the yard, then to grade it. Actually the lowest EPD would probably be ungraded timber that's not planed, that's not treated, because you're basically putting it out to the sawmill straight onto a lorry. When you start adding all the moving around the yard with forklifts, you're adding carbon to that process. But you can make it so complicated. Yeah. If you start looking at every product, we will have a room full of consultants at every sawmill. Yeah. And these EPDs are a real risk of running out of control. So trying to create some sort of generic picture for our sawmills. And I always say it's like measuring trees. You go into a forest, you start measuring the diameter of trees, and eventually you realise that pretty well going to be 25 You go to a sawmill. We're all doing the same thing. We've all got biomass kilns. We're all using the same electricity off the grid. So actually, very few of us are able to do much more than others. So the EPD will be very generic for the industry. And
I agree with what you're saying. It's looking at those processes because once you've got the different processes coming through. So you've got your green timber and going into pallets and stuff like that, which is not kiln dried. So that, to me, that's one process. Then you add in another process with the kiln drying, which will be another EPD, but that's linked to your existing EPD, so it costs less to do because you're looking at the different process. You can then say, right, we've got one for green timber, one for kiln dried timber, and then one for treated timber as the next process on from that. So for me, I think you need 3. I wouldn't go much more than that initially. But that's up to you if you want to. If you can separate out structural timber, it's a difficult one. It depends what your market's asking for. Your construction market is asking for EPD. So if you want to look at C16 and just do C16 and map that, that's one option. I know your pallet market might start asking for that soon as well. Your fencing market, because that's going to be big contractors. If that's highways works and stuff like that, they're probably going to be asking for EPDs.
Once you've mapped C16, you can do pallet, and then all you have to do is add in treatment to the fencing.
Yeah.
You're adding or removing processes, like you said.
Yeah, I think that's the way to look at it. Is you can do a sister EPD in effect for different products. Yeah.
Our haulage costs from forest to mill average probably about 30% of the log price. Yeah. That's down south.
No, that corresponds to what we said. Up to 50% your embodied carbon footprint is you moving the stuff around, and if you can, I totally agree. If you can separate it out, I'd definitely look to do it. If you can go that far, absolutely.
Well, I'm not sure whether the customer at the end of the day will he be comparing the embodied carbon of David's pallet versus my pallet versus somebody else's pallet. I think it will be
probably
the embodied carbon will be a UK sawmill versus somebody coming from Sweden or
I think initially absolutely
Norway or Germany or wherever. I think that's where it would probably go if it's going to happen.
Yeah. I think initially yes. As the legislation progresses though, the customer is going to be coming back saying, I need to hit an embodied carbon footprint of X on a project. So if you can provide timber that's got a lower embodied carbon footprint than James Jones and David or anyone else, that might give you an advantage. But that's way off. That's 10 years away. That's probably the next EPD. I think initially, let's get an EPD first. Let's get one, and then we can work, and then we can get that. Yeah, we can get that figure looking better and make a positive choice for UK timber. Is what we want to look at. Yeah. Coffee? Yeah. We've had a lot of conversation there. No, it's great. Thanks for your time. I'm around for the rest of the day.